Get details and tickets today at flstrawberryfestival.com or visit a participating public supermarket for discount admission tickets. The 2026 Florida Strawberry Festival. Still growing.
Tune in to the Shrink and Wrap Show here on Tan Talk Radio. Our stories and our topics will include, but are not limited to, everyday issues. We're here for you, for our listeners. We want to know what's important to you. So again, don't miss us on Tan Talk Radio. Tune in again, Shrink and Wrap Show. We'll see you then.
The Shrink and Wrap Show at its new time, Thursdays from 4 to 5 p.m. here on the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
The Orange pedophile's State of His Delusion address demonstrated conclusively how completely out of touch he is with the nation he's misleading.
You are about to enter the arena of real news and factual commentary on The Voice of Reason here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Now, here is your host for today's program, Ed Golly.
Opposition to Trump is becoming bolder and more ambitious by the day. Shock and awe is over. Together, little by little, the checks and balances our founders envisioned are reasserting themselves. It's become clear that Crooked Donald is a terrible leader for the country, doing real material harm to our national interest and all of us. He's gone too far, and it's not okay. He's not just kooky. He really is dangerously out of his mind. And what more and more people realizing is that it's our obligation, our responsibility, to stand up to him and stop him from doing harm to us and to fight for the great gift of the constitutional order that we all inherited. We are coming to understand that we must together keep taking the keys away from this old, horrible, failed leader who really should not be leading us anymore. Joining me in the Tan Talk studio today, my two co-hosts, both attorneys. First, Kevin Carey, a former circuit court judge, and our Voice of Reason senior political and legal analyst, Gary Gibbons. Now, in the second hour of the program, we're going to look into why it is that the president that was going to unify us all keeps referring to Democrats as radical. When we compare the two ideologies of Republicans and Democrats, look at the difference for yourself and see if you really think that that's a term that applies to the Democratic ideology. And how the world's wealthiest how has the world's wealthiest nation ended up over $38 trillion in debt? And what could we be doing with that money we spend servicing the debt if we didn't need to spend it paying interest? Well, Gary, Kevin, longest speech in history and probably the greatest compilation of falsehoods, half-truths, and outright lies that we've ever heard in that environment.
Yeah, the problem was I participated in a drinking game, where you participate if you guess what he's going to say, and every time he says it during the speech, you have to take a drink. It was my word was the nobody's ever seen anything like this before. Yeah, which he says every 5 minutes when he speaks on any subject. It's just the greatest thing we've ever done. Nobody's ever seen anything like this
How many
before.
times did he mention Epstein?
And so I only made it through 15 minutes. So.
Those State of the Unions are painful. Even when Clinton was president, they run on. I mean, the law doesn't require there to be a speech. The law just requires the president to give an update of his or her understanding of the State of the Union, and it's become this speech. But what happened Tuesday night was nothing more than a campaign speech. It wasn't any attempt at all made by Trump to unite this country. He never mentioned Epstein. He's got a lot of issues, and I think he was one of the problems I think he's created for Republicans running in November is he kept talking about how great the economy was, and it's been greater than ever. These people know that's not the case. They're having to pay their insurance, which has gone up. They're having to pay for their food. that's going up. So they're hearing this fantasy from this president, and the people that really are hurt by that are his Republicans who are trying to get reelected in November.
Yeah, it just showed how tone deaf he is and how he's surrounded himself in the White House with a bunch of billionaires. If you look at his cabinet, it's not people that have just, millions of dollars. It's people that have billions of dollars, and they are just totally out of touch. They don't have any concept of what it means to have a budget, and how to live, paycheck to paycheck. And as a result, he just sounded completely tone deaf on what people are saying. It's like we have the greatest economy ever. No. Yeah, not for the majority of Americans.
And the numbers were published that came out in today's paper. It says the economy expanded 2.2% last year, down from 2.8% in Biden's last year, and 2.9% in 2023. So it really shows that he's out of touch with it. In the 1990s, we had growth above 4% for 4 years in a row when Clinton was in office. And it rose by 3.5% or higher for 6 years in a row in the 1980s. So we've had much better economies. Electricity prices rose 6.3% just in the past 12 months. Now, you may remember one of the Orange Pedophile's campaign promises was that if he was elected, our energy prices would be cut in half in 12 months, 18 at the most. And instead, they're up 6.3%. Well, he didn't have much to say about that.
Well, and he has no control over utility prices. They're controlled by the Public Service Commission under the state. Now, maybe the average voter doesn't quite understand that, but he has no control over that. But I read something very insightful this morning about Trump. It said Trump he succeeds when he attacks. In 2016 and 2024, he was attacking. But he doesn't do well when he's defending. And that's what he had. He was trying to defend his record in 2020. He lost, and he's got that same problem now, defending his record, because he doesn't do that well because the facts don't support him.
Well, every president in my lifetime, when I've watched a lot of State of the Union addresses, they always lay out what their agenda is for the coming year and what they want the Congress to actually pass, because that's the way our system is designed to work. You're supposed to present ideas, go to Congress, get the law passed, and then implement your agenda that way. He doesn't have an agenda, a legislative agenda. In fact, he sat there and told them, he looked at the Supreme Court and said, yeah, I know you told me that my tariffs are illegal, but guess what? I've just reimposed them at 10%, and then the next day said 15%. And oh, by the way, I don't need Congress to help me. And which is completely false. It's a misstatement of what the law is. None of these tariffs that he's imposed can last for more than 150 days without congressional approval. But he sat there and just told them, I don't need any of you people.
Beyond the fact, I think I agree with nothing this man ever says, and I just don't think he has any character. I have no respect for him. But as a politician, I don't know why people claim that he's a strong politician on a couple fronts. What he should have done on that Supreme Court ruling was say, look, I tried, but I respect the court. I mean, but what that is a tax, it's sales tax. So if you want to go to, and Congress knows that, and they're up for re-election in the House this year, and about a third are up for re-election in the Senate. And they know that they don't want to have a sales tax or any increase in tax during an election year. So what he should have done politically is say, I respect the opinion. I don't agree with it, but we'll move forward. What he's doing really is not helping these Republicans again who are trying to get reelected in November.
Yeah, his political instincts are slipping because the Supreme Court actually did give him an off-ramp from this very, very unpopular tariff policy and say, okay, well, I tried and y'all didn't listen to me. I'm the smart one, but I guess I got to follow the law. Instead, he's doubling down on it.
Well, and he doesn't understand that he's got a much tougher road to go if that Congress is Democrat in November. And so even if he doesn't give a damn about his fellow Republicans, which he doesn't, if he cared about himself, he should be bothered by that because the House is going to be investigating all this corruption if they take over the House in November.
Yeah, and the other thing about this tariff issue is that, all the other countries around the world that made deals with him, remember how important it was for him to get these trade deals done? They're all looking at it now saying, well, wait a minute, are we going to honor the trade deal we did? Why should we? They had bargained for, they had given concessions to get a lower tariff rate, and then he increased those tariffs overnight. So he's just destroying, the chaos is destroying all of our allies, and it's really going to be a problem if he makes the mistake of trying to start a war with Iran without any allies, and he's really pissed them all off at this point.
If you said what could you do to alienate our allies, what he has done would be exactly that. Everything he's done has been anti-ally. And that was the same thing he did in his first chapter, his first 4 years of 2016 to 2020. But these Republicans, again, we've talked about this before, with this being an election year and these primaries are coming up. We talked earlier about the one last week in the Senate race in Texas. But once these Republicans are freed from the primary and they have to go more toward the middle, and Trump really can't help them in the middle, I think you'll see a little more courage from these Republicans after the primaries.
Well, getting back to tariffs, something he said about them that was that everything had been working really well before the Supreme Court overturned it, and that factories, this is quoting him, factories, jobs, investment, and trillions of dollars will continue pouring into America because of the import taxes, and he even predicted that tariffs paid for by foreign countries will, like in the past, substantially replace the modern day system of income tax. And yet, when the question of refunding those tariffs is put on the table, nobody says anything about giving those tariffs back to foreign nations. It's either the companies that imported the products or the consumers that paid for them.
Well, that's exactly right.
It's pretty clear who's paying for those, and there's no argument from the White House being put on the table about that.
There's no harm at all to the country other than the fact that the price is higher. But and when you say it's being borne by the company, that may be for a very short time, but ultimately it's going to be borne by the consumer. And you think about this, Ed and Gary, what he's saying when you just mentioned income tax is let's have less income tax, or no income tax, or less income tax, and let's increase our income our sales tax, which is regressive for the poor. So again, it's very consistent with this concept of let's help the rich and screw the poor.
And the reason that you're right about that, Kevin, is because poor people spend 100 or 120% of their income if they're going deeper in debt all the time. So they pay tax on every dollar they take in and consequently spend. Wealthy people don't spend all their money. That's why they're wealthy, right? If they spent everything, they wouldn't be rich. According to independent estimates, Trump's tariffs have cost U.S. households anywhere from $1,600 to $2,600 per year in the form of higher prices. Okay, so we get rid of income taxes, it's going to be what, 4 times that?
That's what this is. This is an income tax. In fact, it's the largest tax increase in American history, what he did in the last year with his tariffs. And so to suggest that you can get rid of the income tax and replace it with this, and that they're going to be paid by foreign governments is just BS.
For him to say,
it's just crazy.
I mean, him just talk about how much the Treasury has brought in, from poor people who are paying the sales tax.
I told you, I bought some wine over in France, and they charged me a 15% tariff, and I paid it on the bill of lading, and I paid that. I want my refund.
200 years ago, that was the source of income for the government. That's why these custom houses that were built like forts are still standing today in the major harbors, from New Orleans to Key West, Charleston, Savannah, Boston, New York. They're still there because they took those duties in when they either sent cotton or tobacco out or imported things into Boston or New York. And that was the primary source of income for the government. But of course, it didn't cost that much to run the government. In fact, it goes back to the Second Amendment. Why do we have it? Because when an army was raised, the soldiers were expected to show up with their own weapons. We didn't have standing armies that cost $1.5 trillion a year that the crooked Donald's proposing for next year's budget.
Well, and any politician knows you don't raise taxes the year you're up for reelection. The first H.W. Bush, that's why one of the reasons he lost to Clinton in 92 was he said he never raised taxes, and then he had to. But he had to.
The famous "read my lips" quote, right? No new taxes.
But he didn't impose new taxes. He just raised existing taxes.
So when Trump says he's increasing the Treasury, what he's saying is he's increasing taxes primarily on the poor. So with their strategy as well, in order to do that, we've got to make it harder for the poor to vote, for the poor voters to vote. So we're going to bring in these voter suppression measures, like we just saw in Florida, where the House is now going to has passed a bill saying you've got to prove citizenship before you can vote.
And Americans are catching on, because an ABC News Washington Post Ipsos poll found that 64% of Americans disapprove of Trump's handling of tariffs, compared to only 34% who approve. So Americans are waking up.
Well, the biggest problem that Trump has, and we've talked about this, is the independent vote. The latest CNN poll has 70% of the independents are not happy with Trump. He can't win with those numbers. When I say he, I mean the Republicans. The Republicans cannot win with that. Yeah. Correct, and that's the major problem he's got right now.
Which is why he realizes the only way he's going to keep Republican control of Congress is to steal the election, which I think he has every intention of doing.
Well, suppress the vote is number one, and steal the election is door number two.
Yeah. One of his claims was this, quote, "My administration has driven core inflation down to the lowest level in more than 5 years," unquote. So, yes, inflation's come down a little bit. It wasn't anywhere close to the highest in history. When he took office, it was about 3%. And today it's down to 2.4 to 2.7%. But prices for everyday products are impacted by more than just inflation, which goes back to tariffs. They've impacted the cost of fresh produce, beef, and coffee. Ground coffee prices are up 34% in just the past year. That's unbelievable.
The one factor I think you can look at, there are many factors in many polls, but the one factor you can look at is the country going in the right direction? And the vast majority of the public does not think this country is currently going in the right direction. And that is deadly at the polls.
Now, one of his signature campaign promises was a secure border. And he said this, quote, "In the past 9 months, 0 illegal aliens have been admitted to the United States," unquote. Now, that's false. However, crossings are down dramatically, because in the last full year of his predecessor's presidency, which was 2024, there were over 1.5 million encounters with migrants attempting to illegally cross the border. Last year, the first full year of Trump's second term, that number dropped to just under 28,000. So those trends are continuing, but they've never been at completely zero.
Well, remember, though, Ed, he did that by virtue of violating the Constitution, by saying, if you come across here, we're going to send you off to some gulag down in Venezuela or El Salvador without a trial, without a lawyer, without any representation, without even conveying who's there. So I don't give him credit for that. That's all illegal.
But he did get results.
Well, again,
and I think that was one of the main issues that it seems that the Biden administration was just oblivious to the consensus of the probably a very small but still a majority of the American electorate, that it was time to do something about these huge numbers of people coming across the border, which is motivated by right-wing media, that when a Democratic president takes office, that they run around shouting that the border's wide open, which it isn't. Nobody ever heard Joe Biden say the border's wide open. Anybody from anywhere in the world could just come right in. He never said that. He never implied it. but the right wing tells them that, and then that word works its way down into Central and South America, and people start thinking, oh, this is a good time to get in. So that triggers all these people coming up trying to get in, and they can come in if they claim some form of asylum. Right?
Well, when the Biden administration was trying to get funding for Ukraine back in 2023, the Republicans said, we're not going to approve that unless you do the following things on immigration. And so the Biden administration said, okay, tell us what you want, Republicans, for immigration reform. And they turned it over to a very conservative Republican senator from Oklahoma to create this bill that was very distasteful to a lot of Democrats, but they said, okay, that's fine. Let's fix this thing once and for all. Let's fix it. And what did Donald do? Wait a minute. If you take it off the table for the election, then I'm not going to have anything to talk about and scare people about. So he talked the Republicans into then not voting for that, which then again, delayed the voting for the Ukraine support. And that really hurt Ukraine in that war. So it was like a double whammy. We didn't get the immigration reform that we really need, and screwed Ukraine as well. So
Well, you're exactly right. And again, we've talked about this. I mean, Trump is just a horrible human being. He is. He's got no
I'm not giving you an argument.
But my point is, though, that Congress that did pass that legislation, and you're right, a lot of Democrats were not happy with that because it went too far to the right. But once Trump told them to dance, they danced. So the people I criticize are those people in Congress that have no character, no sense of doing what's right, just dancing whatever tune Trump's asked them to dance to.
Well, Abigail Spanberger, the newly elected governor of Virginia, kept asking she did the Democratic response, which, is always, a perilous thing to do, to get up after the State of the Union and try to make sense of what the other, party said in their speech. But she made it very simple. She said, do you think that the president is actually working for you as a average American? And then she answered that question, said, we all know that that's not true. I mean, he's enriching himself, his family, his friends. The scale of corruption's unprecedented. There's the cover up of the Epstein files, the crypto scams, cozying up to foreign princes for airplanes and billionaires for ballrooms, putting his name and face on buildings all over our nation's capital. And that's not what our founders envisioned, not by a long shot. She hit the nail on the head by saying, look, he's doing all this other stuff to enrich himself. He doesn't give a damn about you.
Yeah, the other thing Governor Spanberger did, which I thought was helpful and effective, you hear Trump up there, first he attacks the Supreme Court, I think puts them at some degree at risk because some of these judges have been threatened. But then he talks about the crazy liberals. She's not a crazy liberal. She's from the state of Virginia. The last governor of Virginia was Republican. Virginia, you can only be governor for 4 years, but that's not a liberal state. She came across as very moderate in what she said.
Yeah, she was a former law enforcement officer and then went to work for the CIA for a number of years.
All right, I want to cover a couple more claims that he made before we go to our break. First of all, prescription drugs. His quote, I took prescription drugs, a very big part of healthcare, from the highest price in the entire world to the lowest. He said Americans pay the highest drug prices in the world, and a study kind of supports that, finding that prices here run about 2.7 to 4.2 times higher than in other wealthy nations for the same medicines. That's not a big gap, if you ask me. But the policy has faced legal and industry pushback and has not broadly lowered prices. And of course, we all know that prices cannot drop below 100%, no matter how many times he tries to convince us they've gone down multiple times of that. The other thing he said is that cheating is rampant in our elections. It is rampant. That's the same old playbook. Keep repeating the lie over and over, and eventually people will start to believe it, or get to the point where they just don't know what the truth is anymore, so they accept whatever he says.
Well, quickly, I mean, the fact is there were over 60 cases alleging fraud in the election, and not one of them did a judge find that there was any fraud. So that's just a blatantly false statement.
Yeah, but now look what's going on in Georgia with the raid in Fulton County, okay? A comprehensive audit of Georgia voter rolls includes about 8.2 million registered voters. That audit uncovered 20 non-citizens who registered to vote, including 9 instances when non-citizens actually cast a ballot. A similar audit in Iowa showed that of 2.3 million voters, 87 instances where individuals cast ballots and later self-reported as non-citizens. That Fulton County raid is not about the 2020 elections. It's all about the 2026 election, because we know that what we're going to hear from the White House is that once they get these ballots digested, they're going to say, oh, there was massive fraud and Trump won by 180,000 votes or whatever, right? And that will go back to what you were talking about, Kevin. It's going to give them the impetus to be able to throw thousands of legal voters off the voting rolls, purge them of their right to vote.
Yeah, there are two themes that Trump and his cult has pursued, which are just false. One is that there are all these immigrants coming in that are violent, and that are, in his words, raping and killing. Just not true. And the second premise that's false is what you just mentioned, is that there's no problem about these immigrants voting who are non-citizens. It's just, so he makes up these issues and these I don't know what term to use, like these dinosaur issues that aren't there. And I don't know why these people buy it, but they do. It boggles my mind why
fear. It's all about fear. They stoke the fear, and you got to have a boogeyman. And then if you point the finger at somebody else, it makes that person feel better about themselves.
And think about what Trump did with these tariffs. He doesn't give a damn about the public, because they're paying more, and they're paying more for these products. What he cares about is leverage.
Yeah.
This is a basis for him to use leverage against these countries in any way he wants to. It's all about power and leverage. He doesn't give a damn about the tariff itself, other than the fact it's a vehicle to use for leverage.
Countries and companies, because he can tell a company, I will waive the tariff on the raw materials you need to produce your products in this country when I see $10 million in my Cayman bank account from you. Just chalk it up as the cost of doing business. And besides, you're going to save all that money that you won't need to pay in the tariffs anyway. It's a win-win for you and a win-win-win for me, right?
Yeah.
That's how he's using the presidency to enrich himself. Christ, he's never been able to make a nickel in the business world. Every business he ever started has failed. Everything, right? Trump Magazine, Trump Airlines crashed, Trump wine tanked, Trump Casino went bankrupt.
How does a casino lose money, by the way?
People just bring you money and Trump University was just an outright fraud that should have landed him in prison for 10 to 20 years.
What you see happening,
but
though,
now in the White House, boy, can he rake that money. And it's estimated he and his crooked crime family have made up to $4 billion in just 1 year in office. And where's that coming from? Things like I just cited.
And they got the gall to talk about Hunter Biden.
Yeah.
But there's a theme that's coming out, I think, with Democrats who are confident that what's going to happen in November. And they're coming out saying, even against law firms, and you mentioned companies, which would include law firms, we won't forget. Those of you that went down this hill of just kowtowing to this bribery and this whatever you want to call it, we're not going to forget. So there's a theme now coming out more and more, which I'm happy to see, about we're not going to forget what you did when we get, because we will get power back at some point, and when we do, we will not forget.
Well, you're listening to the Voice of Reason here on the Tan Talk Radio Network, and we're going to take a short break. So, and when we come back, we're going to talk about how Trump is even gaming our own state. and ripping us off. I think you'll be interested to hear about that, along with some of the other issues that the conservatives never want you to hear about.
Are you a writer, inventor? Do you have questions about your intellectual property rights? Well, tune in every Tuesday and Thursday morning at 11 o'clock for Joy on Paper. Once a month, I will have a special guest, the writer's legal eagle, Bill Larson of Larson & Larson, who can answer your questions. Protect your valuable work. Email me your questions to patsy.radio@gmail.com and then listen in every Tuesday and Thursday at 11 a.m. right here on Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network. That's patsy.radio@gmail.com.
You're listening to the Voice of Reason on the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Tune in to the Shrink and Wrap Show here on Tan Talk Radio. Our stories and our topics will include, but are not limited to, everyday issues. We're here for you, for our listeners. We want to know what's important to you. So again, don't miss us on Tan Talk Radio. Tune in again, Shrink and Wrap Show. We'll see you then.
The Shrink and Wrap Show at its new time, Thursdays from 4 to 5 p.m. here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. And now it's time for the Only a Conservative Could Think It Minute with your host, Ed Golly.
The FBI's recent raid on a Fulton County, Georgia elections office was even worse than it seemed. The seizure of hundreds of thousands of 2020 ballots was a blunt force effort to manifest Crooked Donald's exhausting, delusional claims of a stolen election. When a federal judge last week ordered the Justice Department to unseal its search warrant affidavit, the pretext for the raid was somewhere between dubious and nuts. The affidavit states that Trump's team learned of duplicate ballots from an unnamed data analyst who found some unspecified secondhand data from an internet source called ZebraDuck. That's right. The FBI forcibly entered a county elections office based on secondhand information found on the internet. What's more, the FBI never alleges that any actual person committed any actual crime, such as intentionally mishandling or miscounting ballots. This bogus investigation was political score settling, masquerading as criminal enforcement. Think about that.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
Ed Golly with Gary Gibbons and Kevin Carey. Kevin, you want to weigh in?
Well,
the Conservative Minute.
Yeah, well, the point being made there about the search, the evidence supporting the search warrant being very sketchy, if nominal. As a circuit judge, they would come to me at odd hours or during the day with to sign a search warrant. It's kind of like the grand jury situation where there's nobody on the other side saying, "Wait a minute," and you really have to rely upon the judge to say, "This is not enough." And it's hard to do that when you've got these two. In the state system, in the federal system, you have FBI agents. In the state system, you have state law enforcement, sheriffs or police officers who literally come to your office and with a full expectation you're going to sign that warrant. Now they understand that a judge has independence to say I'm not going to sign it, but that's rare. It's very rare. But it just, to me, that highlighted that point, Ed, when it talked about how weak the evidence was to support the warrant.
All of the things that were in that affidavit to support that search warrant had been disproven in court cases. And the guy who signed the affidavit was a renowned election denier. So the judge really dropped the ball on that one.
Right. Shame on the judge. The judge has does have an obligation there. And again, I've been in those shoes, and you have to sit there and step back and say, wait a minute, they shove it in front of you as if they need it, the next 5 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. She could have taken her time and actually done a little bit of investigation on her own.
I mean, I've had people come to my kids still remember they came to my door at 3 a.m. wanting a search warrant signed, but it's got to be done now.
We're talking about the records from the 2020 election.
Exactly.
It's not exactly an emergency.
But I think that warrant was improperly issued.
Let's get into poll watch. 3 new polls in the last 24 hours show Crooked Donald with a 36 to 37% approval and net disapproval over 20 points. So a CNN poll says 36% approve, 63% disapprove. That's 27 points upside down. An ARG poll, Among adults and registered voters, same thing, 62% opposed. And a strengthened numbers Vericite poll of registered voters, 37% approve, 59% disapprove. You probably like that a little better, even though it's still 22 points upside down. Now, Democrats lead Republicans 52% to 42% among registered voters, a 10-point margin and the widest lead since this tracking poll began. And as far as the direction of the country goes, only 10% say things are going well in America. 10%. 52% say things are going poorly and major changes are needed. First change, the idiot in the White House.
Well, yeah, Ed, I said that, as I said earlier in the show, that one number, that one factor is lethal to any politician.
Yes. Florida Republicans just passed a bill to rename the Palm Beach International Airport after Crooked Donald. Now, here's a timeline of the grift. First, Trump filed trademark applications for, quote, President Donald J. Trump International Airport, unquote, and related names, allowing him to receive royalties from the usage of the trademark, or he can sue whomever uses it without his permission, okay? So you can see what's coming here. It's setting it all up. Next, the Republican-led Florida legislature pushed through a bill to rename the Palm Beach International Airport to President Donald J. Trump International Airport. Estimated cost, $5.5 million to the Florida taxpayers. And so now this unprecedented grift to line the pockets of Trump with profits off public infrastructure will be completed once our governor signs the bill into law. Florida Republicans have again abused their power for their own gain, this time by enriching Trump and counting on him to return the favor. That grift surely is going to become law because the crime syndicate posing as the Republican Party is all about stealing us blind.
Yeah, by the way, the Florida Attorney General is now acknowledging with Alligator Alcatraz that most likely that Florida is not going to get reimbursed after they said they were. That you remember when this all started, oh, this is all going to be reimbursed by the federal government. And what that is all about, frankly, is not getting reimbursed means that the federal ecological guidelines don't apply. I don't know why state guidelines, Gary, wouldn't apply to some extent.
Yeah.
But apparently that was an issue. But if the Fed money's not involved, you can't argue that it's a violation of federal statutes. Is that what it was? Yeah,
there's a federal law that says that if it's a federal project, they have to do an environmental study of the land involved before they, do any construction. And this was done under a quote unquote emergency order from the governor. And so they said, no, it's a state project and we're doing this. And then later when he started to get heat for how much he was spending on this thing, he said, oh, no, we're going to be reimbursed by the feds. And so then the tribe, the Miccosukee tribe, sued, and some other environmental groups sued and said, this has always been part of the immigration law and process of deporting people, which is solely federal. The state doesn't have anything to do with that. So why are we building anything as a state project? It's not really a state project. But they've been playing this flim-flam with the judge in that case because she said, shut it down because you didn't do the environmental study. And then the appellate court stayed that ruling saying, well, wait a minute, if they ever get reimbursed, then, maybe it's not a federal project, which is just insane because it is all related to deportation.
Right. And that's exactly why what's happening now, they're not taking federal money because they don't want to be subject to that study. But again, the judge, the lower court judge, as has happened in many cases, has did her job, and the appellate courts is where we're having more of the problems.
And meanwhile, the governor is running around Florida looking into cities like Clearwater to investigate for inappropriate use of funds from these city budgets or county budgets, right? Overlooking the fact that he paid $81 million for a sandbar that'll be underwater in 50 years, if not 20. to a felon who donated to him and paid only $8 million for the property, all of which was supposed to go, the 81 million was dedicated to the Florida wildlife trail, right?
Mhm.
And of course, that sandbar has nothing to do with it. The Hope Florida $10 million scam is still being looked into and investigated. So if you want to address corruption in Florida, look in the damn mirror, Governor DeSantis. And then within months of his handpicking our new attorney general last winter, Uthmeyer landed that lucrative side gig, $100,000 a year. It's a teaching assignment at the University of Florida Law School for just 2 hours of instruction a week. So great editorial.
He admitted that the reason that he needed that gig was because it's unaffordable to live in Florida. No joke. But who else has the ability to grab a side gig, for $100,000 other than somebody that's politically connected like that?
And he's already making 140,
right?
And claiming that he can't get by on that. So then go out and get a better job. And the question I have is, if he's taking a day each week to go teach the class, is he getting docked 20% of his pay because he's not acting as the attorney general of the state that day? No, he's double dipping, isn't he?
Yeah. Oh, and there's a state law that says you can have two jobs.
You mentioned Hope, Florida. That we did.
Unbelievable.
We did have some bad news in Hope, Florida. The grand jury in Tallahassee came back with what's called a presentment as opposed to an indictment, which is not a criminal. It does not create a criminal dynamic. Yeah. So I don't know the details because it for some reason the presentment stays confidential for a period of time. But it looks like there's not going to be any indictments coming out of the grand jury in Tallahassee.
It's basically an admonishment of the conduct that was done, saying it doesn't rise to the level of being a crime that should be prosecuted. But as somebody who was a lawyer and is now the attorney general, boy, you should have known better.
Well, and I love how DeSantis does his Trump imitation. Representative Andrade is the one who's been pushing this, who's a Republican,
right, yes.
but he should be given a lot of credit. But DeSantis has attacked him in a great way lately. He's his best Trump imitation. So he if you don't like what someone's doing, he doesn't like what Andrade's doing, who has a very good reputation. He's very well thought of in the House, and he just attacks him because he doesn't like what he's saying. But that corruption they seem to have gotten away with it. Now there was a statute, and I think that's going to be before the governor to sign, so that cannot happen again going forward.
Yeah.
With the time we have left in this hour, let's take a look at what's shaken with the appropriately now named Trump-Epstein files. You know how Trump is so anxious to get his name plastered all over everything. Well, here's a place it really belongs, because we're seeing people resigning.
Well, there was a bombshell in the last 2 days that shows that the DOJ is really up to their neck in a cover-up. And I think it's helpful to find out, to talk to our listeners about how that was discovered. First of all, the reporting was done by a guy that's on Substack named Roger Sollenberger, and NPR, that's been defunded, went ahead and did some in-depth reporting on this. As lawyers in cases, there's the term called discovery. So if you're involved in a lawsuit and you want to see what the other side's records are in that lawsuit, you send either a subpoena or a request to produce documents. And part of that, in order to index those and know what was delivered, they used something called Bates stamping. And it used to be, you would actually have a stamp, and every time you would hit it on a page, it would turn another number. And so they number each of these things. So the DOJ, now you can do it electronically with PDFs and just put an electronic Bates stamp on there. So Sollenberger looked at the Bates stamping of the documents that were in the index and he looked and cross-referenced with the documents that the Department of Justice had sent to Ghislaine Maxwell as part of her criminal trial, because the government has, under what's called the Jinx Act, a federal statute that says if the government has something that might be of benefit or might help the defense, you have an obligation to give it to the defense before you put on your case in chief. So they gave Ghislaine Maxwell these FBI 302 forms, the ones that are now missing. There was a girl that was either between 13 and 15 who the FBI interviewed 4 times. Okay. Usually if someone is not a credible witness, you just say, okay, they're not credible. We talked to them once, that's it. This time they went back to her 4 times in 2019, which was during Trump's first term in office. Bill Barr was the attorney general during that time. These 302s are now missing. When Robert Garcia, the head of the ranking member of the Oversight Committee, went to look at the unredacted documents on Monday of this week, they're not there at the DOJ. So they're not only haven't been turned over, they're not there.
Well, the term cover-up applies. The FBI conducted 4 interviews in connection with this young girl's claim, and they wrote summaries about each one. But only one of the summaries, which describes her accusations against Epstein, was released by the DOJ. The other 3 are missing. And so there's an index that reflects these documents exist, but they're not there. And on top of that, you've got the Department of Justice just this week having 3 different explanations, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. I guess today's Thursday, there'll be another one. But on Monday, this is a quote. This is what they said on Monday. The only materials that have been withheld were either privileged or duplicates. And then on Tuesday, they changed their tune and said they noted that the documents could have been withheld because of an ongoing federal investigation. I'm not sure why they would say that. Officials did not directly address why the memos related to the woman's claim were not released. And then yesterday, just less than 24 hours ago, they came out with another explanation and said in a new statement that it was reviewing which documents were released in connection to the index, and the department said it would publish any documents, quote, found to have been improperly tagged in the review process, close quote, that are legally required to be made public. So they know their hand is in the cookie jar, and they keep changing their statement day after day, as recently as yesterday.
So the Epstein Transparency Act had a 30-day window from the time it was signed by the president to the time that the DOJ was supposed to turn over the documents. After that 30 days expired and they didn't turn them over, Todd Blanche in early January sent an internal memo to the people that were scouring through the files. And he said, oh, by the way, we want to flag certain things. And some of the things that we want to flag so that we can take another look at them are, guess what? These FBI 302 forms, which are the summary of what the FBI agents' interviews were with the witnesses that they talked to, including the victims. So they actually tagged these as things that they wanted to make sure that they took a second look at. And guess what? Then they didn't turn them over. And now they're missing. And so Robert Garcia wrote a letter yesterday to Pam Bondi, said, this is the first sentence of this letter is stunning. I write concerning the alarming revelation that the Department of Justice is withholding materials in the Epstein files relating to the alleged sexual abuse of a minor by Donald Trump. I have repeatedly raised concerns that DOJ's incomplete production of the Epstein-related documents pursuant to this committee's subpoena and the Epstein Files Transparency Act reflects a clear attempt to protect the president, his friends, or the numerous past and present Trump appointees who appeared throughout the Epstein files. The fact that the DOJ is suppressing documents alleging President Trump's commission of sexual abuse of an underage victim only heightens my genuine concerns about a White House cover-up. And then he goes on to talk about the investigation that was done by Rodman Sollenberger and NPR and the reporting that's come out about these things being withheld. And he asks, hey, it's time to come clean.
All right, I have a couple questions for you two sharks. First of all, is there a statute of limitations on this? Can Trump run out the clock like he always does when he commits crimes?
Good question. I'm not sure what it is when you deal with sexual abuse of someone who was underage at the time, because this particular victim, who was the one that is the subject of these 4 interviews, said she didn't realize who Epstein was until 2019 when they started asking her questions and presented a picture of the guy standing next to Trump, by the way. And then she clammed up because he was the president at that point, and she knew that if she started fingering somebody that was the president of the United States with all that power, she might be in real jeopardy.
Well, let's emphasize again this. Last week, they released, one of the things they released was a list of victims, which should not have been released under the statute, but they had taken some out. But so what the DOJ is doing in this White House, they are very aggressively telling these victims, you better shut the hell up, or we're gonna, and then there are nude pictures of them, which shouldn't be there either, of these 13-year-old or 14-year-old girls. And then if you have any doubt about whether the DOJ is just an arm of the White House, their language, they came out and said this is all false, it's not true, and President Trump, it sounded like it came from the White House as a press release, and it came from the Department of Justice. But there's no doubt, Ed, that there's a cover-up in the sense that these documents were not produced. Mm-hmm. And they needed to be produced, and they keep changing their story every day.
And that's because Pam Bondi is serving as Trump's personal attorney. The whole Justice Department is there to protect him from the crimes instead of working for us to prosecute the crimes, which leads to my next question. Isn't it likely that these documents are going to simply disappear over time and never be recoverable by anybody, in which case what potential consequences does Bondi face in the future, especially one where Democrats are in the White House and Congress?
Well, Gary made the point that our good friend now down in Texas has copies of the
Ghislaine
documents
Maxwell
too.
and her lawyers have them. And so it raises the question of, why did Todd Blanche go down to talk to her and interview her and ask her all kinds of nice questions, and then move her to a club fed type prison? Maybe because I don't know, maybe there's some underhanded deal to say, we can make these documents disappear. I don't know.
Well, the transcript of that interview made clear he had no intention of gaining any facts. He was there just covering Trump's ass.
Yeah.
That's exactly what he was doing. But what can happen legally, Ed, is that Massey and the California, who's the California rep? What's his last name again?
Garcia.
No, not Garcia.
Lou, isn't it, Dan?
Lou? No, the one.
Kana
and Massey. You remember they were asking the federal judge in the Maxwell case to appoint a special master to get all the documents, and the judge there said, this is not really related to the Maxwell criminal case, but you can file a separate civil suit. So in answer to your question, they could file a civil suit for violation of that statute and in discovery and subpoena and ask for these documents from Maxwell. So if they're destroyed by the DOJ, Maxwell has them. Now, if she's destroying documents, generally speaking, when parties start destroying documents, it tends to be found out one way or another.
Yeah, Garcia says in this letter, the American people demand transparency and accountability, and any further delay by the department continues to deny justice to the survivors of the Epstein crimes. DOJ must specify the exact grounds for withholding of FBI interviews containing specific allegations against President Trump, as well as provide an update on the status of any ongoing investigations into allegations of sexual assault against President Trump.
That's the story that Trump can't wait to get rid of. Just keeps getting bigger and bigger every day, doesn't it? Well, stay with us on the Tan Talk Radio Network. We're going to pause for news from CBS. And then in the second hour, we're going to examine the differences between the Republican and Democratic positions and see if we can figure out exactly what makes the Democrats radical, and we'll explain why the national debt isn't the cause of our problems, it's the receipt. You're listening to the Voice of Reason on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Back in a few minutes with more of the issues that the conservatives never want you to hear about.
WTAN, Clearwater,
FM 106.1,
WDCF, Dade City,
FM 102.3.
Listen.
This is CBS News on the Hour, sponsored by JTV.com.
I'm Deborah Rodriguez. Another heavy hitter is resigning over connections to Jeffrey Epstein. Correspondent Nicole Killian has our top story.
The CEO of the World Economic Forum, which convenes in Davos, has resigned after the forum launched an investigation related to potential ties to Jeffrey Epstein, and really is just the latest global elite who has been kind of caught up in this dragnet.
Former First Lady Hillary Clinton is set to give recorded testimony to lawmakers in Congress next hour on her association with Epstein. Former President Clinton will testify tomorrow. A third round of nuclear talks between the U.S. and Iran that began this morning are expected to resume shortly. CBS's Ramy Inocencio is at the foreign desk.
Oman's foreign minister, as we look ahead to talks later today, he's been shuttling messages back and forth, and he said that they hope to make more progress. He also said that the two sides have expressed what he calls openness to new and creative ideas and solutions.
The talks are aimed at averting a war amid a massive U.S. military buildup in the Middle East that includes aircraft and warships. Cuba's president says his island will defend itself against what he calls any terrorist aggression after a deadly shootout yesterday between Cuban border troops and a U.S.-registered speedboat off the island's northern shore. 4 U.S. residents were killed. CBS's Christian Benavides has more from Miami Beach.
There are a lot of questions about what happened, mainly because the Cuban government routinely disseminates misinformation and disinformation, which is why the U.S. government is calling for an independent probe.
The speedboat was registered in Florida. Facebook and Instagram's parent company has plans to notify parents if their teenagers use social media to search for self-harm content. Tech contributor Ian Scher.
The fact that Meta has gone through the effort of creating this feature shows that there is a need for it, and hopefully that it can make a difference in at least saving some lives.
Couple of food recalls may have you rethinking a fruit plate for lunch. CBS's Stacey Lynn.
Nearly 56,000 pounds of frozen blueberries are under a top-level recall for possible listeria. The product was distributed by Oregon Potato Company. Meanwhile, Walmart's Great Value cottage cheese is being recalled in 24 states over pasteurization concerns.
In New York City, the NYPD has just announced the first arrest in Monday's massive snowball fight in Washington Square Park. Suspect charged with assaulting 2 officers. This is CBS News.
Looking for spring jewelry looks? Find them at Jewelry Television. New customers get $20 off purchases of $99 or more at JTV.com.
It's opening day at the Florida Strawberry Festival and Florida Blues Seniors Day. Senior 60-plus gate admission only $10. A free Jimmy Sturr concert at 10:30. The Oak Ridge Boys perform at 3:30. And Alabama at 7:30 on the Wish Farm Soundstage. You got it! Tomorrow features Joe DiMessina and Jamie Johnson. Today is Lazy Days RV Ride-a-thon. Save $5 off Midway wristband with a voucher from Lazy Days RV Display and ride all day for only $20. Tomorrow is Publix Food and Fun Friday. Bring any Publix brand or Greenwise non-perishable and get $5 off the $30 Midway wristband and ride all day for just $25. Get details and tickets today at flstrawberryfestival.com or visit a participating Publix supermarket for discount admission tickets. The 2026 Florida Strawberry Festival. Still growing.
Step into the story at the Bay Area Renaissance Festival. Discover all new experiences for the whole family. Set sail for adventure at Buccaneer Bay. Master stealth and speed at the Knights Ninja Challenge. And create enchantment at the Wicked Wand Workshop. Cheer for thundering jousts. Explore shops and gates. And bite into the legendary turkey legs. Save on tickets at participating Circle K stores. Or visit BayAreaRenFest.com. The Bay Area Renaissance Festival. Weekends, February 14th through March 29th. Huzzah!
Do you have questions after being injured in a car accident or injured because of someone's negligence? Do you feel overwhelmed or uncertain about the next steps after being injured in a crash? The personal injury attorneys at Peronick, Caulfield, Averill, and Noyes have been helping their injured clients since 1955 and are now on this radio station to provide guidance to you. Listen to FLA Law each Tuesday from 5 to 6 p.m. Let their decades of experience help you and your family. Offices in Clearwater, non-attorney spokesman.
Hi, I'm Dawn Reese with The Dawn Reese Show, most powerful names in entertainment, every Thursday at 5 p.m. I have so many different segments I'm so excited to share with you, from miracle stories to celebrity interviews with Hollywood connections to travel to local business, promoting your business on the air with me, an amazing opportunity to grow your business. Tune in to the Tan Talk Radio Network, 106.1 FM on Thursdays, 5 p.m. with me, Dawn Reese.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
Now, the voice of reason continues here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Here again is your host for today's program, Ed Golly.
Along with me in the Tan Talk studio, my two co-hosts today, both of whom are attorneys. First, Kevin Carey. Kevin was a former circuit court judge, and Gary is our senior political analyst and legal analyst too, although they both can analyze things legally. If you've been with us the first hour.
Well, I think your reference was us to sharks a minute ago, Ed.
Oh, that some things are just sort of sporadic. Like we can't catch it in time. That's just the way the world is. Who's the guy that said the first step in a civilization is to get rid of all the lawyers? Yeah. Well, that was a long time ago. But anyway, as progressives and liberals and Democrats, the president who claimed he would unite the nation is dividing us by casting the Democrats as the bad guys, the virtual communists who want to destroy the country. He even said the other night at his State of the Union address that the Democrats want to destroy Social Security and he's going to save it. Apparently, he's forgotten how it came about. In 1935, the Social Security Act was advanced and passed by the Democrats, the Republicans always opposing it, and sought to even privatize it under Baby Bush's administration. So I thought it'd be interesting to sort of compare the two political parties' positions on a lot of the issues that we deal with these days and see if you think that the Democrats sound like they're radical, communist, American-hating, terrorists who ought to be thrown out of the country. Let's start with public schools. The legislature of this state, by constitutional mandate, are supposed to provide a high-quality public education for all students. And instead, what we see is that they're attempting to dismantle the public school system by underfunding it, paying our teachers the lowest scale in the union. I think there's only one state lower because you figure in the District of Columbia, we're 50th out of 51, and turn it all over to private institutions to run with vouchers using taxpayer dollars. That's unconstitutional. So they can't do it. They should resign because they can't do what they were hired to do, which is run a good public.
Fully fund is what the Florida Constitution says. That two duties that the legislature has: fully fund education and balance a budget. That's it. So they look at all the other stuff that comes out of Tallahassee. That's not those two things.
So you have these generous multi-million-dollar salaries for the CEOs of these private schools with perks and retirement plans and purchases through non-compete contracts with corporations run by legislators or friends or family or whatever. essentially then giving these private enterprises tax dollars that they can use to support the campaigns of the Republicans. But what do the Democrats want?
Well, Democrats believe in public education. It's the leg up. It's the you're equal with everybody else if you have the ability to pull yourself up from whatever your economic status is by getting a good quality education that's paid for and free. So we want high quality, well-funded public education available to all students.
Now, can we interject just for a second? Two things that I think the American dream requires: strong public education and strong public libraries. If you look at both Obama and Clinton, neither one of those presidents came from much, and they both benefited from that. They would not have become president without that. So it's strong points you made about only two things that our folks in Tallahassee need to do. But I think it is important to step back and say, well, it is important that we have a strong public school system, which is being drained by charter schools and magnet schools, which are not responsive and not subject to these same restrictions.
And we also want higher education, colleges and universities, state universities that are paid for by taxpayers for qualified students. And we did the Bright Future scholarships that are for, students who do well in high school so that they can go on and get paid to go to college. But what happened with Reagan is starting with Reagan, he started cutting back the funding for state universities in California when he was governor there. And it's become the Republican brand ever since.
Yeah, there's nothing about this administration that focuses on helping those who can't afford education and opportunities. Nothing.
On the environment, it seems that the conservatives and the Republicans want substantial pollution of air and water because it's profitable to the polluters, with no effort at all to contain climate change. Now we're seeing, just in recent days, it seems we're turning the EPA into the EDA, the Environmental Destruction Agency, as we seek to use as much fossil fuel as possible, deluding ourselves into thinking there are no consequences of that.
Well, there was a time, under Nixon, there was Earth Day came aboard under Nixon back in the 60s. But what's happened with the Republicans now, as you focus on environment, is just corrupt, Ed. They ignore what is clear science. And you've got the state, for example, the state of Florida saying you can't reference climate change in any state documents. I mean, this is just, it goes back to saying that the earth is flat. I mean, and we're so behind every other country. The facts are clear. This is science. And for anybody, any of these politicians to ignore science is just corrupt.
Yeah, it's always phrased as these are horrible regulations that we have. And you know why we have the regulations? Because you mentioned Nixon was actually the one who signed the law that created the Environmental Protection Agency back in 1970. And you know why it was created? Because the river in Cleveland caught on fire, spontaneously caught on fire because of the amount of pollutants that were floating on top of the water. And people said, you know what, this is not healthy for us. And we've had Love Canal, all these other things over the years that have been just environmental disasters, and they affect human health. And yet the Republicans, they think, well, that affects my ability to create, plastic factories and other things that I want to build and make money off of. And it's really a health issue that Democrats believe.
To me, the irony is they talk about regulations being job killing, and yet with all the regulations we have, we still have the strongest economy in the world, hands down. So it obviously isn't killing jobs.
Well, Trump went to big oil back before this election in 2023 and said, if you support me, I'll reward you. And he's done that in spades. And then, for example, these projects in the Atlantic for wind energy have been shut down, and federal judges have come back and said that's illegal. So there's a constant battle to just just to try and get this administration to say this is what science says we should be doing for our health and for our welfare.
Well, that's because, Mr. Kerry, you don't understand that coal is clean. You simply wash it and it'll be clean, right? Come on. Are you kidding me? Let's talk about taxes. Republicans seem to want lower and lower taxes for the wealthiest people and corporations, which leads to higher deficit spending. The crazy Democrats want what, Gary?
Well, they want a progressive tax system so that the more you make, the higher your tax burden is, because everybody should have the same relative tax burden. And what's happened is the Republicans have said, well, wait a minute, we need to give tax breaks to the rich because they are the quote unquote job creators. And they are the ones that, if we give them more money, it will trickle down to the rest of the lower echelon. And what we've seen is that just doesn't work. It's really destroyed the economy of the country. We have a $38 trillion deficit now. And that's all been as a result of the Reagan tax cuts, the Bush tax cuts, and the Trump tax cuts.
Mm-hmm. And when it comes to the trickle-down theory, the operative word is trickle, because the lower income
tinkle is more accurate.
Are not getting wealthier, but the wealthy are, which gives them more power and more control.
Well, yeah, it's also destroying the middle class.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact is that any society, when you lose the middle class, becomes unstable as a matter of politics, whether you look at our country or other countries. But the middle class in this country is getting smaller, which is by definition destabilizing this country.
Yeah. Let's talk about voting. The Republican position on voting seems to be to substantially suppress voters and assert that there's massive cheating going on so that they can control the elections, even though there's no evidence of any of this.
Yeah, and Democrats want to get rid of the Electoral College, have one person, one vote. It shouldn't be, our presidential election shouldn't be decided by 7 states. They should be decided by 50 states. And also, we want everybody to be able to vote. Simplify voting, mail ballots, whatever you need to do, same-day registrations, all of those things. We should encourage people in this country to be involved in their representative government.
And so
what's happened is that they aren't.
Why are the Republicans so opposed to mail-in ballot? They claim it's a way to cheat. But what's the real foundation of that opposition?
I think the real foundation is that they can't then intimidate people at the polls, and they can't try to turn you away with ICE agents surrounding the polling place, for example.
We didn't spend much time, at least I didn't spend much time thinking about the Electoral College before 2000 when Gore won the Electoral College, and then we had in 2016 Hillary Clinton won the popular vote but lost. So, twice in recent memory, we've had a candidate lose the popular vote, yet be in the White House. And something about that, to me, is wrong. I think to a lot of people is wrong. The challenge is, how do you change that? I think we'd have to change the Constitution. People have talked about it, but I haven't seen any action toward doing anything about it.
And the push for same-day voting, I think, has just become completely realistic. Worked fine 200 years ago when a lot of people lived their whole lives and never went more than 30 miles from where they were born. But these days, so many people are traveling, or they're working long shifts. Air crews, flight crews, they can't be here on election day if they're in Frankfurt, Germany, right? So why are we trying to deprive them of their right to vote?
I mean, the voting procedure works just fine.
It does.
I mean, there's no problem. Again, it's just like this argument about we have these violent, immigrants coming to this country. It's a made up problem to further their agenda. That they know that if fewer people vote, they will probably win. The more people vote, they generally lose.
Yeah, because their programs are not popular. Most people don't want to follow what the Republicans are selling. the taxes for the rich and taking away my health care and cutting or adding to the time when I have to work longer before I can retire to ever get any Social Security. All of those things are bad ideas for most people. And so if they can eliminate people, and now they're taking real shots at students and won't allow a student ID to be a valid ID for people to vote. Well, think about it. If you have a lot of people at the University of Florida that are out-of-state students, which there are now, because it's become such an elite university that there are, they're getting students from all over the country and all over the world. Well, at least they were before the immigration stuff was started. But they're not going to allow a student ID to be a valid form of identification, and those are issued by the school. They know who these kids are. There's nothing wrong with that form of identification. So they're going to say, well, no, you have to have a driver's license. Well, there's been a demographic change in the way that kids are now driving. There are a lot of kids now that delay getting their driver's license. I was there on the day I turned 16 to get mine, but that doesn't happen anymore. And now some of them aren't driving at all, and they can't afford cars because of their student loan debt. So they're out there taking Ubers everywhere, and they don't need a driver's license. Well, now they can't vote. But after the Florida legislature gets through with things, we're not going to be able to vote without a passport.
Yeah, it's going to get worse. The playbook for the Republicans is suppress the vote and control the judges. It's not complex, Ed. It's very simple. And they appoint these young judges that are going to be around forever who have the same mentality that the politician has. That's the playbook. It's not complex at all.
The poster child for that's probably Eileen Cannon, isn't it?
Well, she as she's come back with a ruling recently, which we probably could take a couple minutes talking about. Gary, that had to do with the Trump litigation down in South Florida.
Yeah, Jack Smith, as the special counsel, is required by law, by the special counsel law, to file a report at the end of his investigation, which he did, and he filed it with the court. And she's said, under no circumstances can that report ever be released to the public. What are you hiding? What are you hiding that's in that report? It's, probably worse than the Epstein file.
If there's ever been an audition for the Supreme Court for Trump to appoint her to the Supreme Court, this is it.
I bet you're right. I think so.
And the appellate courts, the 11th Circuit, on at least 2 occasions have criticized her, and they weren't a liberal appellate court.
No.
I mean, she has made several mistakes in favor of Trump, but she will continue to do so.
Social Security is something that Crooked Donald asserted he would protect and the Democrats want to destroy and get rid of. There's no truth to that, of course, because the Republicans opposed Social Security when it was founded and passed into law. Then when they discovered how popular it is and realized it's what do they call it, the third rail of politics, you don't dare talk about getting rid of it, even though it's an entitlement program, then they moved on to privatizing it, which Baby Bush tried to do until he was shot down after about 3 or 4 rallies where he tried to sell it to the public. And the public realized, you turn this over to private industry, they're going to suck hundreds of millions or maybe billions of dollars out of that trust fund and out of the income to Social Security to pay these banksters to manage it, where it's managed just as good as it could be now by the government for a fraction of what they charge to manage it. So the public didn't like the idea, rightly, and Social Security is still working fine. It's paid every benefit due to every beneficiary since it started 90 years ago, and will continue to do so. It always needs some adjustment as demographics change. And the Democrats have always supported it and always will, because so many people rely on it.
And there's a high percentage of the public that is their only source of income.
And just think if he had been successful in getting it privatized, and then we had the financial collapse in 2008, 2009, where we had to bail out the big banks and the insurance companies who had mismanaged everything. And if they were in charge of Social Security, we would have been, raising additional trillions of deficit spending to reinstate the Social Security Trust Fund.
And keep in mind, there was another trend too along the line where these companies they were minimizing these 401k contributions. When I worked for a law firm, they would call profit sharing, put money into a 401k for the benefit of the employee. But that's gone away too. So that's another barrel here where they've said, let's cut Social Security. By the way, we're cutting. We don't contribute to any 401k or match any 401k. That's gone way down the last 20 or 30 years.
Yeah. They went from pensions. Remember when people would work for GM, for example, or IBM for their entire career, and then they would retire with a pension. Well, then, the Republicans said, well, wait a minute. If companies have to contribute to that, we could just take that money and pay it out to shareholders and tell people that they have to create their own retirement plan from their own savings, and we'll call it a 401k plan. And now if you're not saving for your own retirement, it's your fault. But keep coming to work every day. We need you here at the company store. There's been a complete reversal of what used to be in this country a social contract between corporations and their employees, where the employees were a lot more important than the shareholders. And now, ever since the Republicans and Reagan and on down, it's all been a hyper focus on got to be profitable for the shareholders. And who are those shareholders? They're the wealthiest individuals in this country.
Well, there was an age of enlightenment in the 60s. You can't debate that. I know some people try and debate that. You can't. But what people like when John F. Kennedy and Johnson came along, Hubert Humphrey, and I want to mention Robert Kennedy, who was kind of an asshole, pardon my French, in the 50s. He was counsel for McCarthy. But what happened with Robert Kennedy? He went in and he saw the poverty in this country, including elderly, and children, and that changed him. And what was realized was are we going to allow as a country? Are we going to allow ourselves that these people will just be living in such abject poverty? And that's what happened. And we said and the answer was no. And that's where we got into the Great Society. But for example, the Voting Rights Act, which was signed by Lyndon Johnson, is about to be gutted by the Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. And they view that as a victory that the Voting Rights Act will be gutted.
And then Republican policy with respect to so many public services is to privatize them. Examples are prisons, the hospitals, the post office,
immigration detention centers. All of those are private.
The weather service, and of course Social Security, which we just talked about. That's the Republican agenda. And why? Because again, that means that instead of providing the services that government should provide, it ends up taking tax dollars that go into these private institutions that then can be kicked back to the politicians in the form of campaign contributions. I think the Alligator Alcatraz, a textbook example of that. That was a no-compete contract. Let's suppose that contractor came to DeSantis and said, well, I can do that job for $70 million. He says, well, make it 75, and I'm not going to put it out to bids. And guess what's going to happen to that extra $5 million? So he finds a way to take taxpayer money and get it into his political coffers with entirely without the consent of the taxpayer. We're making
all under the guise that there's an emergency.
Yeah, fire drill.
Yeah, that's the playbook of both Trump, which by the way was rejected by the Supreme Court recently in the tariff case, where they said that's not a basis and hurt his feelings. When I listened to Trump that Friday afternoon in a news conference criticize that court, I've never heard a president in my 67 years be personal and attack these judges at such a level. But the playbook is everything's an emergency, and DeSantis does the same thing. But the numbers are just staggering. If you stop, these are conservatives who are supposed to be concerned about the bottom line. if you put these numbers in front of them and said, how do you justify these numbers when you've got no bid contracts? It's just staggering.
The argument I would give you for the ability of government to run services efficiently is like comparing the water system with the utility system, the electric system, right? You've got to pay 20% more for electricity because the power company needs the profit and the stockholders need their dividends and so on. You don't have that when the municipality runs the water system, and you still get water every time you turn on the tap, and it's potable. So if we privatize the water system, wouldn't the same thing happen? The bill would go up 20 or 25% to pay for all the profits, but it wouldn't be run any better. In fact, look what happened with privatized power supply systems. Enron is a textbook example of how privatization was abused to steal hundreds of millions of dollars from the California consumers by juggling electricity around just to make the most profit that they could.
Well, look at Florida. I mean, the utility rate increases are just corrupt. The Public Service Commission pretty much rubber stamps pretty much every request, and they take, any risk that they take is borne by a rate increase. I mean, the Public Service Commission procedure is not working in this state.
And then they changed the law to allow the governor to appoint the members of the Public Service Commission rather than having them be elected. And so they get people that worked in for the investor utilities to be appointed to the board that's supposed to be oversight, and the fox, guarding the hen house situation. And, the rates just go up. And again, then they tie the electric to gas, the gas powered plants instead of solar plants. And then the rates are fluctuate because, the price of fuel goes up and down. Price of the sun doesn't ever go up and down, but we don't ever invest in that, right?
And that would give you energy independence better than anything.
Sure it would.
Because it's there
and it would
every
lower
day.
costs.
And I want to talk about health care. The Republican position on health care seems unchanging. They have been trying to eliminate the Affordable Health Care Act ever since it was passed. They have strong support for private insurance, which always costs us more. And that's the death panel that you remember Sarah Palin was so giddy about when she called the government the death panels. But the government takes care of everybody on Medicare or Medicaid. It's the private insurance companies that decide whether you can get the health care you need based on whether or not they want to pay for it, if it's going to cut into their profit margin. And that leaves millions of Americans unable to get health insurance. Whereas the Democrats, those radical, crazy Democrats, think what?
We want Medicare for everybody.
Yeah.
Why not?
Why is it that we have to be so different than every other country in this regard? I don't think people here understand what it's like in Europe or in other countries where you have a socialized medical system. There's this, it's almost like we train people to think, oh, don't mention that word, socialized. That's like communism. Don't mention that. But people need to understand the system we have is not the system most countries have. Countries take care of their citizens in terms of health.
And yet we pay much more per capita for health care that we don't receive. If we would simply put the money that we pay to these private health insurance companies towards extra taxes that you actually got full health care back from, instead of some gatekeeper telling you that you don't get that MRI, it would be great if we could actually get it. I love Medicare. I've been thrilled since I turned 65 to be able to walk into a doctor's office and they treat me.
Mm-hmm.
No questions asked.
Yeah. So the question is, are these ideals that the Democratic Party advances so radical and so dangerous? Do they reflect communism? Do any of us ever hear politicians say that they want the government to take over all the major industries, the airlines, the railroads, the steel mills, and so on? None of them ever say that. But that, of course, is what you have in a communist system, there's no effort to turn this country into a communist nation. They aren't challenging free enterprise or a capitalist system. They're just suggesting that we have a much better life when government provides these services and we pay for them and then get them. So yes, other countries pay higher taxes, but they get the services that they pay for. Whereas we pay the taxes and don't necessarily get the services that we want that would make our lives better and more secure. Why is that a big deal? Why is that a problem? Republicans think it is because it cuts into the profit margin for the rich.
Well, I mean, we should be proud of in this country of saying we have certain values we want to live by. Those values include we're not going to allow poor people to just die, not have food and medicine. We're not going to allow that. We're not. In some countries, people tell me you go to India and you see these children in the streets that are, half alive. But I hope and I think we've made a decision in this country not to do that. We value helping other people that are disadvantaged.
Especially when the top 1% holds more wealth than the bottom 50%, and more than entire countries do. Well, you're listening to the Voice of Reason here on the Tam Talk Radio Network. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the national debt. Why is it so high, and why isn't it the cause of our problems, but in fact, the receipt? At Golly with my two co-hosts, Gary Gibbons and Kevin Carey. We'll be back in just a moment with more of the issues the conservatives never want you to hear about.
Caregivers find the support they need on Connecting Caregivers Radio with Linda Burhans, the gal who cares for the caregiver. Heard every Friday from 1 to 2 p.m., Linda and her caring and knowledgeable guests will bring you education, information, and resources, as well as a shoulder for caregivers. That's Connecting Caregivers Radio with Linda Burhans, the gal who cares for the caregiver, where you can find help and hope every Friday from 1 to 2 p.m. right here on the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Ain't it good?
You're listening to the Voice of Reason on the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
Here's the real State of the Union, okay? We have a nutjob wannabe king who's doing everything he can to censor opinions he doesn't want to hear. He has his goons arresting, incarcerating, and killing American citizens. He's got funding for cancer research and children's hospitals, while he rakes in literally billions of dollars for himself and his family. He's coming after our right to vote. He's protecting pedophiles and won't explain it. He's lining the pockets of billionaires, all while neglecting the sick, the poor, the hungry, in the name of Jesus, by the way, who you could read all about in a Donald Trump edition of the God Bless the USA Bible that is made in China and available for $99.99. That is the State of the Union.
Very well said.
Spells it all out, doesn't it? We took a half hour talking about it, and he summarized it in 55 seconds.
Should have played that in the first hour.
Well, the national debt is the United States' next great war. At least so says Jody Arrington, who's the top Republican on the House Budget Committee. And he's referring, of course, to our $38 trillion national debt, which requires $1 trillion every year simply to service it. So if we're going to use this war analogy to describe it, we can go back to about 1981, when Republicans' so-called supply-side tax cuts began a 45-year upward transfer of over $50 trillion in wealth that made the billionaires fabulously rich while it hollowed out our nation's treasury. They stole that $38 trillion from our government and another $12 trillion at least from working-class families via wage freezes and the destruction of unions, another thing that Democrats support. Stronger, better wages, even if it requires a government mandate to do that, because we're sure not getting it from corporations. And of course, the unions are what gave us those pensions that you referred to earlier, Gary, and the secure jobs. Of course, like anything, there's a downside to it. They got a little bit too greedy, and then the next thing you know, the auto workers are out of work because the Japanese could make a high quality product and sell it for less. So it's not a perfect answer, but it's a better answer than crushing labor down to where living is virtually unaffordable in this country.
Well, the bottom line is you can't trust corporations who have a duty to their fiduciary duty to their shareholders to maximize profit to call the shots. What you've seen, quite a bit lately is less and less of these watchdog groups, which you need more and more of, like Common Cause and Florida Watch, to step back and say, wait a minute, this isn't the way we should do this. But the way things are now, it's all about the corporate structure and maximizing profit for the shareholder, and that's not what's good for the common man or common woman.
Now, I assert that the number 1 billion is too large a number for a human mind to comprehend. You can't really see a billion of anything. It's such a big number, but we're talking about trillions of dollars, and 38 trillion of them is now our national debt. Let's kind of translate it into some of the things that could be done with that. It's roughly what it would cost to fund a Medicare for All style universal health care system for a decade, for 10 years. In other words, we could have guaranteed health care as a right in America for a decade and still have money left over because it would eliminate the need for Medicare and Medicaid. We could run it for a lot longer than just a decade. It's more than 20 times the entire federal student loan debt that our young people carry with them, in some cases, for their entire working career.
Yeah, it's a shame that we decided to impoverish generations of young people by first, raising, for getting rid of the state taxpayer money that went to universities, say, no, we're not going to do that anymore. So now we're going to make you pay out of your own pocket, and we're going to let banks actually borrow money for zero at the Fed window and then loan it out to you at 8%. And you pay that for the rest of your life. And as a result, you can't buy a car, you can't buy a house, you can't do any of the things that your parents did, because we were able to go to school. I remember a quarter at the University of Florida cost $250 when I started. I mean, forget about it now. It's just crazy how much they have to pay.
Well, there was a time when Republicans campaigned on a balanced budget. There was a time when they would make that argument as a matter of morality, that it's not fair to impose that debt on our children and grandchildren. But those days are long gone.
And the days that are replacing them are days where factory jobs are actually declining, in spite of what the orange pedophile said. Auto factories, for example, need fewer workers because they have robots to do the work. So what we need is the people that can maintain the robots more than anything, which generally is going to take somebody that has a college education. So if we want our economy to function better, it's to our advantage to get more people into higher education, to do the kind of jobs that are going to evolve in this century. When these 18-wheel trucks start driving themselves, that's 17 million more people you don't need sitting there driving a truck every day. What are they going to do?
I hear from conservatives that I don't like Trump, but I like his policies. I want to say, what?
Yeah.
What policy do you like? Isolation? I mean, what
border control?
Yeah,
that's what they like.
Well, but most people don't. That has never, though, Ed, been a major issue in life. I've lived life in this country for 67 years. That's never been a big issue in life, the border control. I'm sure some people down, if you're in Texas and California, it affects you. It certainly doesn't affect Canada. They're up in Minnesota, as if Canada is a problem for immigrants. But when you tell me that I don't like Trump because I know he's a philanderer, he cheats, he's just a bad person, but I love his policies. What do you love? I think more you just dislike Democrats. I think what happened in 2024 was that this large dislike for Harris or Biden, or these perceived, as you said, liberal Democrats. But the policies that they're suggesting, and ones we've talked about for the last 2 hours, of energy and isolationism,
tariffs.
These are not strong policies. What about those policies are strong?
It's funny. I saw a poll this week that said that if the election were held today and Biden was running against Trump, Biden would win.
Yes, I saw that. Yes, Biden wouldn't. Not Biden. Trump would not beat anybody today in an election.
I think not. And of course, housing is considered one of the main reasons that affordability is a forefront issue in the country. With the $38 trillion of our debt, we could have built tens of millions of affordable homes, even at $300,000 a unit, which is a pretty generous estimate. We could have built over 100 million homes. Gee, you could live in a house free for that kind of money, and it wouldn't just reduce the housing costs. It would fundamentally reset the housing market and break the back of the affordability crisis that is crushing us.
But with that debt, though, Ed, you're significantly affecting the quality of the life of the children and grandchildren, which is a moral issue.
That's true, and I think that goes to the interest that we need to pay on it, because now it's $1 trillion a year that we put into the Treasury that we don't have to spend for infrastructure or pre-K education, any of the things that we've talked about, healthcare, medications. It goes into the pockets of the people that are buying the debt, which always turns out to be the wealthier people because they have the money. They have the excess money to buy the Treasury bills, whether they're Americans or Chinese or Europeans or corporations or pension funds. They're getting the benefit of that $1 trillion.
Yeah, if that doesn't bother you, think about the concept this way. Rather than when a parent passes away and there's a will and assets passed down, what if what was passed down was debt? By the way, you children, you now have this. I've got a MasterCard debt of $50,000. I've got a mortgage of $500,000, and it goes to the child. That's what's happening here.
Yeah. And what's so sad about it, and what a lot of people don't realize, is that in 1981, when Reagan went into office, our national debt was less than what we pay on the interest on that debt now. It was less than $1 trillion. So what did he do? He said, what we need to do is we need to lower income tax rates significantly. So instead of making the rich pay their fair share, he lowered those rates. And then he said, well, we got to increase our military spending, and we have to do all. So they just took out this giant credit card, this national credit card, and started adding to it. And we have a deficit, and we have a deficit. And every time, so he did that on steroids for 8 years. And then comes along George W. Bush, who does it on steroids again for 8 years. And then Trump does it even worse than that in his first term, and then renewed it last year. And so as a result, we're going to have this deficit increasing every year going forward, and we're going to be able to do less and less for the good of the people, because we're going to be paying the interest to the rich.
So the Treasury takes in about $5 trillion in income taxes or state taxes or fees every year, spends about $7 trillion. And now we're seeing that 1 out of every $5 that we take in needs to pay the interest on the debt, so we can add another $2 trillion to it every year, so that eventually it's going to become 2 out of $5 and then 2.5 out of $5, so that it can't be sustained. How in the heck can you sustain that?
The problem you have when you have someone like Trump in the White House is there's no attempt made for a consensus to address the hard issues. He just blames the Democrats, but he doesn't do anything. There are no hard issues being addressed. These are issues that need to be addressed. It's not fair to impose upon the next generation a lower quality of life, which is exactly what we're doing. But he has no ability to bring in Democrats and Republicans and say, look, we've got to address these issues, and we've got to make some hard decisions, and there has to be some pain. And let's try and have the pain be borne equally. None of that happens.
Well, as Gary pointed out, this Republican national debt, always eternally blamed on the Democrats, but generated by the Republicans, who also, by the way, generated 10 of the last 11 recessions that we've been in. We've had that happen under Republican presidents. But
do you think most Republicans would know the answer to the question? Who was president when there was a last surplus? Do you think most they would understand that was Clinton in the 90s?
Mm-hmm.
You know, that $38 trillion national debt, if we didn't have that, it would be enough to make universal pre-K permanent for generations. So you could have health, child care for your kids from the moment they're born until they went off to public school. Wouldn't cost you a penny. That's one of the major expenses that young families are incurring now that they say makes their life just horrible, because they have to pay $25,000-$30,000 a year to have child care.
Means you need dual income to have a kid.
Yeah. So that prevents people from going to work because they can't afford to put their kid in daycare. It's crazy.
And it affects, I've seen it with, I have a daughter who's about to have her third son in about an hour or so today. And she's stayed home. And I respect, that often people both have to work, but you see how that affects the child to some extent. And I'm not saying children who are in daycare, come out poorly, but there is, I think, a benefit to having that situation where one of the parents can stay home. And it could be the father. It doesn't have to be the mother. It could be the father. But so again, what my point is, it affects the quality of life of these future generations.
Exactly. And so the Republicans end up telling us, well, we've got all this debt, so we cannot afford these social programs or these entitlement programs. We need to take those away from the people who need them most so that we can make the billionaires wealthier. So we end up not having a spending problem in America. We have a looting problem because we were told these tax cuts would pay for themselves. This is the scam that's run on us. If we cut taxes, people will have more money. They'll circulate it into the economy and we'll get more tax revenue. Forget the fact that statistically and historically, it's never happened. It's always been just the opposite. The tax cuts resulted in more debt. But the reason it doesn't is because when these tax cuts that Gary just referred to took place, they gave a pittance to the working class people. They get a few extra dollars a week. That's not enough to move the needle, whereas the billionaires got the lion's share of these tax cuts. Well, they don't spend that money. They don't need to. I mean, think about it. If you have a net worth of $500 million, is there anything that you don't have already when the tax cut comes along? You've got everything you want. You can buy anything you want.
And it was a lie to say that they reinvested into hiring people. They don't do that. They buy treasury bonds, like you said.
Well, when Musk bought Twitter, he fired, 70% of the employees? He didn't hire more people. He fired them so he could make more profit for himself.
Yeah, what we've been operating under for a long time is the GOP to Santa Claus strategy. So when they're in power, you cut taxes, which people like. And then when the Democrats are in power, they scream about the deficit. The deficit's too high, so we need to cut programs that help people. And what it's done is it's gutted the middle class. The middle class was created in this country by Democrats and by government programs like the FHA that allowed people to have a 30-year mortgage or a 15-year mortgage. They didn't exist before that.
That's right.
Okay. Yeah. You had to, if you wanted to buy a house, you had to put like half down in order to buy a house. Well, nobody could afford to do that other than the rich. So in order to create wealth in the middle of the country, we created these programs. The New Deal and the Great Society programs are things that really created the middle class.
Well, as an observer of politics, and you mentioned the New Deal, if you look at Lyndon Johnson, and one thing that, Vietnam took him down, but one thing he did, I think better than even if John F. Kennedy had not been assassinated, was he took that goodwill and pushed the issue for this legislation that gave us the Voting Rights Act and other, the Great Society. But as a matter of politics, he had to go to these Southern Democrats. They're all Republicans now, but these were Southern Democrats back in the day that he had to persuade them because they were conservative. They weren't liberal. They were very conservative, and they're now Republicans. We had to go to them and say there's a reason why this is a good thing. And he did a very good job persuading these Southern Democrats why this legislation was important.
It's not uncommon to hear a politician who's black tell us that, the Democrats were the party that were involved in voter suppression and lynching and all these terrible things. So you don't want to vote for Democrats. They don't represent freedom for the minorities. Conveniently forgetting what you just said, that it was actually a Democratic president that signed in these bills into law. And then all of those Democrats who supported these oppressive ideologies became Republicans. And now are trying to do the same thing you just said earlier. The Supreme Court's going to gut the Voting Rights Act, right? So they can take more eligible voters out of the pool and stay in control.
Well, there's a problem in this process, Gary, as you mentioned. If you look at a map and you can, doesn't matter, who the candidate is. It could be the worst person in the world, but you've got so many red states regardless. And as you mentioned, you're only looking at 6 or 7 states that are really in play in any election. Something's wrong with that system.
And remember, when Eisenhower was in power, we had those top tier tax rates up to 90%. The wealthy people in this country weren't fleeing in masses. They were staying here and still continuing to build wealth. Because we had those taxes, we were able to build primarily the interstate highway system. That was pretty much his legacy, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Because he got the whole idea started. It was modeled after the Autobahn over in Europe. Of course, the schools that could be built and the hospitals were all funded because people in this country could generate enough wealth to do that and still be wealthy. They were still living high on the hog. They didn't run away. So there's no need to cut taxes to keep wealthy people in this country. But by cutting them, what we're doing is not only cutting, as a result, the income for the lowest paid workers and making it more and more difficult for them to function, but also we're giving the wealthy more power to control everything in government, including the people who regulate their businesses, so that they can make even more money at the expense of either the environment or the health care of the poorer people who still show up and work every day. I mean, if that garbage truck doesn't come down your street for 2 weeks, you have a major problem on your hand, right?
Yeah.
But you want to pay that guy as little as possible to come and take care of that service for you. It's as important as anything to you if it doesn't happen anymore.
Well, I think one of our greatest presidents, if not the, was Franklin Roosevelt. What did he do? We had the Depression, and he brought on these programs to help the poor. That's what he was focused on, and he's perceived as one of our greatest, if not our greatest, president.
I think you're right. Yeah, and so this national debt isn't the cause of our problems; it's the receipt, as Tom Hartman writes. It's the paper trail of the largest upward transfer of wealth in 250 years of American history, and until we name that and tell the truth of how 4 Republican presidents got us here, we'll keep paying for it. The problem is that economic growth doesn't make it disappear or even decline. So how is the next generation going to deal with it? It's just going to be an increasingly large portion of deficit spending. Eventually, it's going to devour half the annual income to the Treasury till this whole house of cards collapses.
And that should be the discussion. That's the real issue. And that should be politics should be about solving real problems, not manufactured issues like Trump creates.
Yeah. Is a tax increase for the wealthiest Americans really going to be something that's unpopular in this country? I rather doubt it.
And I remember when Reagan, I was in college when starting law school when he ran in 80, because under Carter, there were 70% marginal tax rates. But that's a tax rate on passive income. This isn't income that they're out there working, the sweat and equity. This is passive income that they're gaining.
Yeah, and the other things that we used to do in the state of Florida, there was an intangible tax return that had to be filed that actually taxed people on their wealth that they had accumulated. So if you had stocks and bonds, you had to file a tax return and pay a tax to the state of Florida that was used to fund services for people and run the state government. Well, Jeb Bush got rid of that. Just look for a Bush and you'll find a tax cut.
And do you remember what the rate was? It was 1%.
Yeah, it was very low. Yeah.
So if you had a stock portfolio of $100,000, you owed $1,000 tax.
Yeah.
And with the market steadily increasing, I know that Crooked Donald wants to take credit for that, conveniently forgetting that the stock market continuously expanded through his predecessor's administration. It's just steadily been going up, not due to anything that he did. You had that made back in a few months, but you're right. Why are we taxing the poorest people instead of the richest?
Well, and as we started out our show earlier, we had a State of the Union address where we had a president who had no tie to reality. He was talking as if he was in another planet than where we are in this country right now. So you can't solve the problem when there's no recognition of the problem.
Exactly. And you can't lie your way out of the problems either. Unfortunately, they stay here no matter how rosy a picture you paint. Well, that's about all the time we have for today here on The Voice of Reason. That brings us to our quote of the day, which is by a journalist named Russell Lines. He said, "Every journalist has a novel inside him. That's a very good place for it." Well, stay with us here on WTAN for national and international news from CBS, and join us again next Thursday morning at 9 o'clock for another edition of The Voice of Reason. My co-hosts today, Gary Gibbons and Kevin Carey, thank you to both. I'm Ed Golly reminding you, if the statement seems a little too implausible to be true, don't believe it. Just because a conservative said it,
Make them prove it.
WTAN, Clearwater,
FM 106.1.
WDCF, Dade